All right, so let's take a look at how to write a paper about a wrongful conviction. Now, like most essays, this is argumentative by in general by nature. In Always Running, LA poet laureate Luis Rodriguez tells us the law isn't always about truth. And there's some other interesting passages there. There's T.I.'s thoughts on working in prison, incentivized incarceration, as he calls it. Now, one of the most striking statistics in the world today is that the United States imprisons more of its population than any other country in the world. Next to that would be Russia and South Africa, much further down the line, Poland. That's not a good statistic, of course, by any means. It's not a good thing. We hold more than 2.3, this is a few years old now, we hold in the US more than 2.3 million people in state, federal, and juvenile correction facilities in this country. As you can see, rates of incarceration per 100,000 people. We are by far the leaders in the world in that unfortunate category. And the reason that most people in the US are in jail is due to drug offenses. So right here, 49.7%, by far the vast majority. We have, see, by offense, weapons, immigration, sex offenses, extortion, on down the line. Now, one of the options, there are basically two options for this essay. One is that you can look at, here, let me go back a page. One is that you can look at the wrongful conviction of any person. You want to look at this as an individual case and make an argument for why this person, why the conviction was wrong and why it should be overturned. The second option with this essay is to look at a journalist who has been imprisoned. So we're either looking at wrongful conviction of anyone, or that second option, the imprisonment of a journalist. They have a lot of similarities, and you can approach them using the same structure outline that I'm going to teach you here in a minute. It just depends on you. Which subject are you more interested in? They're both very, very interesting problems and issues with freedom and free speech today. Let's see. This is journalists in prison. Okay, yeah. So starting on this section here, this is actually a growing concern in the world, and every year this keeps getting worse. In fact, there are more journalists being imprisoned every year. Every year you look at it, they're setting new records worldwide, which is, of course, another record that we can't be proud of. Why are most journalists imprisoned? Anti-state remarks, not publicly disclosed charge, retaliation from the government, defamation. There's a lot of similarity here in the vast majority of these cases. Fortunately, there are cases where freedom of speech is protected, but where it's not protected, a government can put a journalist in jail for any number of reasons that they claim to be true, whether they are in fact true or not. Countries that do this the most, we have Turkey, China, Egypt, Ethiopia, Vietnam, on down the line. This section here gives you some specific, examples of who you might look at. And on these pages we have the person, their title, when they were arrested, and if I guess this is also the sentence. And I try to put on here also if there's a reason that like an actual legitimate stated reason why this person has been imprisoned. If there's nothing there, there's no stated reason why this person has actually been imprisoned. So this Egyptian political activist Ahmed Duma, sentenced to life in prison. I'm not sure exactly why, right? Abdullah al-Fakaraini, the Egyptian co-founder of the Rost news network, was sentenced in 2013 for spreading false information. But whether that is really false information or just information the government didn't want out, that is up to debate, right? El Masri, the Egyptian human rights lawyer and political advocate, also arrested in 2013, not a clearly stated charge. Shevchenko, a Ukrainian journalist, same thing there, arrested in 2016 for what it is not entirely clear. This Chinese freelance journalist Yang Tongyan has been was arrested in 2005. Again, not a stated reason. You know, you can go on down the line, even see examples of political imprisonments in America, like Mumi Abu Jamal is a good example. But that's where we start. We start with a person, right? This essay has to be specific. You have to look at one specific case of false or of wrongful conviction or of an imprisoned journalist. Why is this particular person in this case being treated unfairly? That's essentially the premise of the essay. And you want to make an argument for that. Essentially, a legal argument would have these 8 parts. And what I've done is I've just adapted that general legal argument to something that we can do in an essay form. So we're going to start off with the introduction, and basically that's kind of a standard introduction. You have at least 4 parts. You have a hook or a tension getter, 3 to 4 pieces of background information. You want to introduce the case, so introduce the person, introduce the case, and introduce a thesis, which would be an argument on why this legal determination should be overturned. If it's a wrongful conviction, why should it be overturned? If this person is imprisoned illegally, then that should be the claim. Why is the imprisonment illegal? And what these all rest on, these papers, they rest on legal theory, just like a legal argument would. So the next thing you want to do in paragraph 2 is it's a real simple paragraph. There's really not much to it, but you want to find a legal term and define it. So let me go ahead and take a look in here and see if we can find an example. Okay, good. We have examples here of that. Definitions. If you have questions about approaching definitions, there's a section here on what different definitions you might use, how you might use them, different strategies that relate to each. Okay, so here's something that you might see in this type of essay. This is the definition of DNA, but of course I did not rely on a medical resource for this, although if I were writing a paper about biology, that would be a very good resource. Since this is a legal paper, I looked up kind of a legal definition of DNA, so that's what we have here. Let's see what it has. One of the most reliable forms of evidence in many criminal cases is in our genes, encoded in DNA. DNA evidence can be collected from blood, hair, skin cells, and other bodily substances. It can even be used to solve old crimes that occurred prior to the development of DNA testing technology. So this would be my definition. This would be a definition that I would use if I were, let's see if we can go back to the outline here. Yeah, perfect. So like, say my thesis depends on DNA evidence. that would be a reason to define then in the next paragraph, well, what exactly is DNA evidence and how is that helpful, like in a legal sense? That's what we should be talking about there. So that second paragraph, we want to define a term that is relevant directly to your argument. So say I'm writing a paper on, DNA evidence is going to be my main piece of evidence. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, use a quote very much like this one here as paragraph 2. And as it goes over in this section, there are multiple ways to define something. You might not want to use one definition. You might want to use a couple definitions, including perhaps a personal definition, probably not with something like DNA, but if you're doing something general like justice, perhaps. So use a couple of, at least one, but perhaps even a couple of reliable academic sources to define your term. The next thing you want to do is state the relevant law. Now, this isn't something we come by, unless you're a lawyer or pre-law or something. You might not know these things. Certainly, I don't know these things off the top of my head, but you just do a little bit of research. So once you figure out the case, right, you've chosen a case. Once you've figured out the case, you can do some research into laws relevant to why that person, why that case was decided a certain way. So let me give you an example here. This is also on DNA, so this parallels nicely with what we were just doing. If my thesis depends on DNA evidence, the law that I could state here could be this one here. This is what I did here is I looked up laws. I think I looked up this laws on DNA testing. Yeah, and then I found it that way. This is U.S. Code 3600 DNA testing, 18 U.S. Code, and you just want to state essentially the law. So this can be actually it should be, most likely anyway, a very short paragraph in which you are just stating the law. What is the law upon which your argument depends? You want to find a law like this one here. This is basically, this tells us upon written motion, an individual sentenced to death or imprisonment the court that entered the judgment of the conviction shall order DNA testing. Okay, right. So this would work if, for example, there was not DNA testing in a particular case where someone is being wrongfully convicted. We can ask for DNA testing, right? If that did not occur, that judgment is false based upon this. So we need to make that argument based on this law and saying, based on this information, you can't hold a judgment based on this person without DNA evidence. So that's what we're talking about there with paragraph 3. State the relevant law, right? What would be the law upon which your argument depends? And then after that, it becomes very much like a normal essay. You're looking at what are the different problems or errors in the case, doing some analysis there, using evidence, using analysis, wrapping it up, and concluding with a reflection on the justice system. So let's look forward a little bit here. Okay, so it has other examples of stating a relevant law. Okay, the main body of your paper should be based upon the errors in the case. And most likely, these are some of the reasons. These are the most common reasons that that convictions are overturned. So look for these, right? False confession, false forensic evidence, perjury, mistaken witness identification. And then the second to last paragraph is a remedy. Basically, what were they given? In the famous Central Park 5, they were given $41 million for the wrongful imprisonment. So look at some examples, try to assess a reasonable remedy. And then at the end, just reflect, right? What has this taught you about justice? What has this taught you about journalism and justice? All right, thank you.